Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Dr. Akash Show. My name is Dr. Akash Bajaj, and I am a triple board certified physician focusing on providing you rituals and routines to keep you resilient and robust. I want to focus today exclusively on some of the foundational things that you can incorporate to develop and integrate a longevity mindset. Mindset? What does this have to do with living longer? Well, here's the reality, guys, and you know this as well as I do. In the world we live in today, information is not the problem. There is so much information around us from so many different sources. Application is really the challenge. So, where do you get your information from? What do you choose to apply to your life to help you become completely optimized? Now, there's a lot of different ways to look at this depending on you, your personal situation, your health situation, etc. But one thing that I've learned in doing this kind of work for several years is there are some foundational things that everybody can truly benefit from. And on this episode, I want to go back to the basics a little bit and discuss some of these foundational issues. So today I'm going to give you 4 foundational issues for helping you cultivate a longevity mindset. So let's get right into it. And before we do this, if you find any value in this podcast series, please like, subscribe, and share so other like-minded people can see this information as well and also join on their optimization and health journey. Now, discussing longevity mindset. What does the mindset have to do with anything? Well, here's the reality. Most of the time, when we know what we need to do to get to a certain place in our health, the problem isn't incorporating those tools and utilizing the tools. The problem usually is those mental roadblocks, those mental barriers, those mental procrastinations, those self-negotiations, and those excuses we make with ourselves, for ourselves. It is truly as simple as doing the work. Now, one thing that I've seen in my practice is if you follow certain fundamental things, you're going to get yourself the majority of the way there, and then you can kind of tweak it on the back end to really get totally dialed in. But it truly doesn't make a ton of sense to start taking a bunch of supplements and this and that when you're not really getting the foundational stuff under control. You're not really developing your own self-control to stay disciplined with that stuff first. And so let's talk about that. Let's bring this back to the basics. I'm only going to present 4 major areas or major topics for you to consider maybe refocusing on if that makes more sense for you to get these things really dialed in super, super tight. And then you can start to stack upon it with other things that we've talked about in other episodes and in future episodes. So issue number 1 or topic number 1. Any guesses what the first and probably arguably the most important issue is going to be? If you guessed your diet, you would be correct. There's a saying that abs are made in the kitchen. Now, what this really means is if you want to get that physique that you're striving towards, that you're envisioning for yourself, most of this comes down to what types of food you consume. And most importantly, what types of foods you choose to not consume. Now, we've talked a lot about this in previous episodes, so you can go back and take a look at that. But because this is more of a back to basics episode, what I want to point out to you is initial things to consider. If maybe you haven't done it quite as much as you would like, or perhaps you've just kind of fallen off the routine, or just a few simple steps. Understand, if you're not aware of the macronutrients that you're taking in, there's frankly no way that you can be certain you're meeting any sort of goals for yourself. Now, what are macronutrients? Primarily protein, fat, and carbohydrates. That's it. There are, of course, a ton of other nutrients and vitamins and minerals that will all be discussed in due time, but basics include protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Despite what marketing may tell you or what current culture or social media or the news may suggest, all 3 of these are vitally important for you and for your well-being. Of the 3, arguably the most important would be protein. Now, depending on where you're at in your journey, the first thing that you can do is start recording your macronutrient intake. There are several free apps available all over the internet, and all you have to do is input your diet on a daily basis. Now, listen, if you've never done this, what I can tell you, what I've seen with my clients and myself personally is despite how healthy you think you might be eating, you're going to be surprised when you start measuring it. Personally, for me, I thought I was eating very healthy. And when I started tracking it, I noticed I was eating way more fat than I thought I was and way less protein than I thought I was. This primarily happens with a lot of people because everybody focuses on the carbohydrates, like the low carbohydrate diets, et cetera, et cetera. But what can sometimes happen, especially in cleverly disguised protein bars, quote unquote, is they're actually just kind of fatty, candy bars. So if you're not tracking those macronutrients, you'll never really know, and you'll always be frustrated with why you are supposedly eating healthy, but you're not seeing any progress. This can oftentimes cause people to say, well, I just need to work out more, I need to work out harder, etc. And that may lead to potential injury, which can completely throw you off course for weeks or even months. So before you start to go bananas at the gym to overcompensate for why you think you're not really achieving the goals that you deserve or you're working for, look closer at your macronutrient intake and most importantly, measure that. In respect to diet, of course, there are other things that are probably pretty obvious at this point, like minimize or abstain from alcohol intake whatsoever. Alcohol arguably has a very important role as a social lubricant. There's no question about that. Now, if you abstain completely from alcohol, of course, you're going to maximize the benefits of not intaking that substance. But the argument can absolutely be made that moderate intake of alcohol maybe provides some great psychological and social benefits for you and your peer group that might be okay. So this is all a very personal decision. So kind of explore this with yourself and your situation and see what feels right. But just understand, things like alcohol intake, they are an additional source of calories, an additional source of other vitamins and nutrients and potential nutrient depleting types of chemicals that you may need to compensate for if you choose to partake. 3 areas to really focus on from a diet standpoint that promote longevity with tons of data behind this. Number 1 is fiber. Number 2 is antioxidants. And number 3 is omega-3 fatty acids. We won't get into the discussion on why that is here today, but focus on those 3 areas to help promote your longevity journey. Number 2, regular exercise. Now, regular exercise has been shown to improve cardiovascular health, improve longevity, improve muscle strength, and most importantly, and this is what we're learning more and more about, improve mental and psychological well-being. If you talk to anybody who works out on a regular basis, a lot of times it has nothing to do with the physical gains. It has to do with the psychological balance that regular exercise provides. Now, regular exercise, the key word there is regular, aka consistency. It doesn't matter where you are in the spectrum of strength and endurance and stamina. You do what's right for you, but do it consistently. That could mean a walk around the block every single day, rain or shine, if you're in a good mood and motivated, or if you're in a crappy mood and you just don't feel like doing it, but you force yourself to do it anyway. That consistency and that regularity is truly where the benefit lies. This has also been shown when we study the blue zones around the world, where people tend to live significantly past 100 years old. Refer back to a previous podcast episode that I recorded discussing specifically and importantly the benefits of exercise, where we do a deeper dive. Number 3, stress management. Now, stress management can do all sorts of things that affect your overall physiology and ultimately your ability to live longer, live healthier, and just affect that longevity timeline up for yourself. One of the major hormones that we're very familiar with now that stress artificially elevates chronically is cortisol. I recently discussed cortisol in a podcast where we do more of a deep dive, but kind of the gist is this. Chronic stress without proper stress management or coping techniques leads to basically tricking your body into thinking it's in danger all the time. And when your body thinks it's in danger all the time, those stress hormones like cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline, etc., they all increase, but they never really decrease. So your body's put in this chronic state, and this leads to all sorts of negative consequences, which I discuss in that episode on cortisol. So go back and take a listen to that podcast episode to get more information on this. But ultimately, for this episode, the takeaway is this. Stress is a part of life. It's not necessarily a bad thing at all. It's arguably a very good thing, but stress management and stress coping is vitally important to make sure that stress doesn't take you over and take you out before your time. Now, this is where things things like exercise come into play, regular meditation, journaling, gratitude practices, etc. There's so many things that we can do to minimize or manage our stress. And we'll talk more about that later. But ultimately, having this kind of a plan is vitally important because physiologically, it helps regulate your body, which is going to help optimize you in the long run. And then finally, sleep. Quality sleep cannot be overemphasized. The idea that you can just work all night and get ahead in life and just never sleep has been refuted time and time again with tons of scientific data. But here's the bottom line. Here are the things you can do to make sure you get great sleep. Number one, have a regular sleep routine. This can include things like sleep at the same time every day, turn off screens 1 to 2 hours before sleep, minimize caffeine intake after 1 to 2 p.m. that day to minimize your ability to not go to sleep. Have some sort of a routine, maybe a journaling practice so you get everything out of your head and onto that paper so you're not ruminating about these thoughts. Again, I go deeper into this on a previous episode about sleep, so refer back to that episode on the Dr. Akash Show where we discuss more tips and tricks. But sleep is vitally important. This is also, by the way, where you regulate your hormonal balance. Important hormones like growth hormone go up during sleep. So if you're not sleeping well, you're not benefiting from these gains naturally. So all the supplements in the world and all the peptides in the world and all the other things that you may be trying to do, maybe you don't need to do all that if you can just get your sleep in order, for example. These are the 4 major areas as a back to basics episode for you to really dial in and regulate before you start looking out to all these other options we have today. To recap, number 1, diet. Number 2, exercise. Number 3, stress management. And number 4, sleep. So your rituals and routines for all 4 of these have been laid out specifically in previous episodes of the podcast. Go take a look and you can really pull what works for you from those episodes. You'll also understand why it's important to really focus on these areas. Now, resilience, which basically is the ability to move through difficult situations and push forward, will automatically be a healthy byproduct because of the halo effect when you start pursuing these types of healthy pursuits and optimizing yourself. You will automatically become resilient when you're sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night. Your resilience automatically improves when your diet is dialed in, when you're exercising on a regular basis, when you have such strong stress management ability that anything thrown at you, you can deal with and cope with and not overreact and completely lose the day because you're emotionally just overwhelmed, right? And that leads us into being robust. Robust is basically being the most powerful version of yourself. And you can do that as well as a secondary byproduct, almost like the halo effect again, from getting everything else dialed in. It doesn't matter how many cups of coffee you drink the next day. If you haven't slept well, you are not going to get to that equal level of cognition and activity. You're just not going to do it. Ultimately, trying to pursue those things to compensate for a lack of a proper balanced lifestyle that really optimizes you is going to have its own set of consequences. You might crash after that coffee. You might have a sugar high that you think is riding you through until you crash. And then you start to experience the negative effects of sugar, et cetera, et cetera. Not exercising because you're working too much, et cetera, is going to have its own untoward consequences, like negative health consequences down the road. So if you want to be robust and you want to be that most resilient version of yourself, you want to be that version of yourself that you see 6 months from now, you got to start the work today and you got to focus on those foundational issues: diet, exercise, stress, and sleep. Get those dialed in. Refer back to my previous episodes for more information. And once you get that set up, then you can start stacking upon it. So guys, remember, as I always say, the best time to start something was yesterday. The second best time is today. Don't look back tomorrow with regret. Take one small step today to getting yourself maximally optimized. Thanks for tuning into this episode, Back to Basics of the Dr. Akash Show.